So I was just a bit surprised when I saw that you are doing church planting. Where did the idea come from?
Well, it depends on what you mean by church planting, right? Of course, in Europe and in North America, we don't need to establish the church for the first time. So that's, in the classic sense, church planting is where you didn't have any church and then you plant the church there, right? So in some places in Europe, like in the Balkans, there are frontiers of church planting. In parts of Turkey, etc., but usually in Europe, there are churches wherever we go. But church planting is broadly spoken about is starting new congregations. And throughout the West, the number of congregations in relation to the population has been dramatically declining since around 1900. For example, in the United States, there were 26 churches per 10,000 people in 1906. But by the time you get to 2000, there were 8 churches per 10,000 people.
Yeah, but still, in the US, more people are religious than in Europe, as we can see. They have a very big influence on politics as well.
Well,
even the vice president was a priest under Trump, as I remember.
Yeah. Although one should not confuse civil religion and Christian nationalism with church attendance or church involvement. And so they're not necessarily people who are gathered in Christian communities for the purpose of growing and making disciples. But there are many people who wave a religious flag. This is true in Europe as well. But the churches that serve the community, that are a public witness, that are gatherings of people, we've seen a marked decline in the last 100 years within the United States and within Europe especially. So in Debrecen, which seems to be a very churched community, the number of churches per 10,000 people is like 4. So it's half the United States concentration of congregations per population.
Well, when my father was a child and he was doing the confirmation, the professor was hunting for them not to go to the church on Sunday.
Yeah.
So here we have this explanation that it's because of the communism. Yeah. And what else? And what's the reason in Western Europe and what's the reason in the US, where no one was saying not to go, at least not in the school?
Yeah. Well, I think that there are a couple of factors, I think. One is the Enlightenment, which created a kind of secularizing impulse throughout Europe and throughout the West. So there became an alternative to being a religious person. It used to be you would decide which religion you were part of, but then an alternative grew up. I think the other is urbanization, people moving into cities. life began to be organized around the city center, around one's job, perhaps an ethnic group or a group of people that moved into the city together, rather than the village church, which was the center of rural life. So I think that's a big factor, urbanization and industrialization. And then, of course, the information age adds a new level of speed to all of those factors, right? And creates less of a center to life that is found in a parish or in a congregation. Yeah. You see this in the Netherlands, which was, devastated in World War II. Following World War II, Enlightenment theology had taken over in the state church, particularly, which then, the distinctions between a person of faith and a person without faith began to blur, to the point now that 50% of people in the Netherlands identify themselves as decidedly not religious. So they're not just lazy about religion. They're not just, I was baptized and I don't go. It's, I definitely don't go, 50%. So those factors in the West actually accelerated secularization. I think the persecution in the East made it very difficult to be a Christian. But the Christian churches in the East did not become liberalized. They maintained a kind of Christian orthodoxy and faithfulness, even though, many problems existed. And in fact, became a social force in the change itself. I mean, you look at the Catholic movement, Solidarity in Poland, you look at the Reformed movement in Timișoara and in this area and throughout Hungary. It was Christian orthodoxy and liberation were wedded in many ways. In I think a very interesting way that I don't know that we've documented very well. But of course you could write volumes and volumes on why this has happened. But our hope is that church planting doesn't, it's on our website, church planting doesn't establish the church, but renews it. It gives a new laboratory, a new model for how a person could move forward that may be more attached to the developing world's model than to the pre-industrial model, right? So there's a lot of things going on in this space. And so we think establishing new communities could be a part of that renewal strategy.
And what's the method? How do you do it? Because I cannot see you on the streets as I can see the witnesses of Jehovah.
Right.
Knocking on the doors, or how do you make it?
Yeah, no, it's a completely different way of thinking about it. When we established this partnership in Hungary, it was at the invitation of the university chaplaincy. They had just received the university building back from the state. It had been a convital, right? Daniel Pushki was in the United States, had somehow heard about me and my interest in these kinds of things. I was in a post in a very large American church where my responsibility was church planting locally, nationally, and globally. So the church paid me to work on these kinds of things. And so we met in 2008 and began to have conversations with the officials in both denominations, the Reformed denomination in the United States and here. And we began with the university, helping them to establish 2 new communities on the 2 subsidiary campuses of the university. So there was the main campus, and then we call it the B campus and the K campus because no one in the United States knows how to pronounce these words.
Especially on the Slovene, yes.
And that was our first experiment with starting new communities. And so really the university experience is kind of the core. And really the new people who have come to faith came through relationships, we would have a grill party, we would have a pub night, we would have a Harry Potter trivia day, these, different kinds of ways for people to socialize. And the church really created a space that was very open for people of faith, but people that also did not have faith. That they could just be, they were not part of a party culture or, something that they felt would distract from their studies, that kind of thing. Kind of a fun environment. But also worship was there. Proclamation of the gospel was there, Bible studies, places to discuss doubts and questions. And I remember, Daniel and his staff, his crew of people were quite creative, with their, they would just put out some posters and various things, but never a confrontation with a person, why do you, do this or why don't you do this, right? But more of an invitation, right? I think I view church planting as more like digging a well where people can come and drink, right? Rather than building a wall and saying, would you come in and stay inside this? Here you have to join and be a member, right? We're more of you can come to the fountain, you can come and experience God here in this place. It's a different way of conceiving of a Christian congregation.
And it seems it's working.
Yeah, I think so. It's grown. These campuses, have grown. Out of this, people graduated, and many of them stayed in Debrecen. And then Daniel became the pastor. He gathered a new church in the community that we helped to sponsor, and that one of the local churches allowed them to be in their parish and provided them with people and funding and space, and so this Urati Gurukhaisa grew up, the Lord's Meadow Church, and it's probably a third of people who were from the Nojaru Church, and a third from graduates of the university ministry, and then about a third of people who are brand new to the faith. just people that were looking, were interested, were connected in some way. You know, their kids went to the same kindergarten or as someone, and it's like, we have this new thing, you could come and see it. And they were like, oh, okay. And so that's one of the things that a new church does, is it provides a sort of come and see. Whereas an established church, you can have that, but it's less likely to be received. It's like, well, I've seen that church for 100 years. There's nothing there for me. People have already pre-decided, right, in many ways. But I do think even those churches, through relationship and hospitality, can reach into the lives of secular people. You know, secularization is real here in Hungary, even though we're we're twice as religious, 3 times as religious as the Netherlanders and the Scottish, right? We still are a minority of the population. You know, people that are actively attending a church, actively involved, actively connected. And I say that as though attendance is the goal. That's not it. It's really community. It's our public witness to Jesus Christ, our unity around common values, family, relationships, goodness, all of the things that I think the church provides for society.
And if you compare the US and Hungary, what is easier here when you do a church planting, or what is more difficult?
Well, I think it's a little easier because I think people are more honest about where they're coming from. I think Christianity in America has a cultural layer to it, a sort of trendiness to it that people can identify with and yet not really understand what they're doing or saying, right? We have music and rock bands, and we've recentered secular culture in Christianity to such an extent that it's just an option. It's like rhythm and blues. It's like choosing your musical style. Remember, there used to be 2, classical and rock and roll, Now there's rhythm and blues and hip hop and, alternative and grunge alternative. You could name 1,000 different, and Christian is one of those musical styles. I mean, it has its own category in the Grammy Awards, And so there are people that are caught up into some of those kind of trappings. And then I think the political appeal, particularly right now on the right wing of our society. People have said, we have terrible culture wars that we must solve, and the church must be warriors for culture. And so people that are interested in that get connected. And so some of it's quite unhealthy, right? You have a little bit of that in Hungary, but mostly people are pretty clear. I'm not, I am, I'm thinking about it, right? Whereas it's more confused in America. Of course I am, because I'm an American, and Americans love Jesus, You'll hear this kind of thing. I saw one, I was just in the United States for a month, and one statement was made that, well, Jesus wrote our Constitution, right? There's just an insanity sometimes among people, right? That doesn't have much to do with reality. And so So I think it can be more confusing there right now. And a lot of the pandemic created a lot of division, a lot of animosity within our churches. Really caused a lot of problems, much more than I saw in Europe. Europe was pretty sane about it, even though there were some strange groups. But in America, it was a very socially divisive issue, and that crept into our churches as well. So, yeah, the recovery of the congregations there, the newer ones that I've dealt with, has been slower than it has been here, which is interesting.
When I was in the US 4 years ago, one of my colleagues told me that even the Catholic churches in the US are Protestant.
Yeah. There's among very, very traditional Catholics, there's a fear, a kind of hand-wringing of what they call the Protestantation of Catholicism. Yeah. And in many masses that I've attended, it's very difficult to see the difference, right? There might be a devotion to Mary or something like that at some point in the service, but they're very, very similar to many of the more traditional Protestant churches. It's quite interesting.
And what can you learn from here and adapt in the US?
Oh, well, I think we just took a group of 5 Hungarians to the U.S. Every other year we have a learning exchange. So Americans come here and we sort of have we meet each other and we have some discussions, and we've had various topics that we've discussed, and then the same is true in the U.S. And I think Americans can learn a sense of history. Our history is so short, right? And we have a very fluid view of history. We tend to shape our short history to go with the group that we want it to go with, right? And that gets harder when your history, like in a city like Debrecen, is 800 years old. There's some history, right? We're in a library named after a person who lived 500 years ago, twice as long as the United States has been a country, right? Or more. And so there is a rootedness to, I think, the Reformed Church that provides sort of a rudder, a way to navigate through the waves and changes of the decades, right? It's interesting. Americans tend to identify themselves by the decade they were born in, or they evaluate history by the decade, right? And that's less true here, it seems. Yeah. Although some of that Western, that sort of pop culture influence has come everywhere, right? The information age is powerful, and the short attention spans of the internet and music and popular culture has infected all of us, right?
Yeah, almost everyone has Netflix.
Yeah, Netflix and a telephone, and kids are gathered together and talking to other kids that aren't even there, right? Which in a way brings people together in a different way. We have to look at the possibilities and opportunities that come speed of communication. But there's also a rootedness, a sense of, we should slow down and make this decision a little bit more carefully. That's been a lot of my job as an American church official, is to say to people who have very good ideas, and they come from that American entrepreneurial spirit, right, is to say, slow down, let's think this through, let's make sure we have some things connected, let's connect you with people who can really help you, right? And I think that's one of the things that the congregations that we've worked with here really teach us is, we can do this, and let's do it properly. Let's slow our roll a little bit. Let's make sure that we're doing this as well as we can. Not everyone will agree with innovation, so we have to be sensitive to that. I've learned a lot of those kinds of lessons from my colleagues here. Good people. Very progressive in their thinking, but they also know it has to work, right? And so I think that's been a big learning for us.
I met you at the Dorcas event when the UNICEF and others were there.
Yeah, and my colleague Scott Engelsman was here.
So do you also work with the refugees in the U.S.?
It's not my particular role to work with refugees.
I meant the church, the Reformed Church.
In the Reformed Church, we have some similar projects on our southern border. We have a person that is a mission associate like me who tries to create awareness and provide resources in our southern border crisis. And that can be tricky. It's a very hot political topic, but also there's just a lot of humanitarian need at the border, right? I think there's a real sense among Christians that if we could help solve some of the economic disparities between the South and the North, then we wouldn't be in this crisis as much. But there are huge systemic and, economic and social forces arrayed against us, in that issue. So, providing temporary aid, helping people to connect with people who are related to one another, these kinds of things is a work that we do, that the Reformed Church is involved in America. Yeah.
And do you also work with the minorities? Like Native Americans?
Yes, indeed. We just, our Associate General Secretary just had a very large meeting in Oklahoma with some of our historic Native American congregations. We're a very small denomination, so I think I think the most that we've ever had is about 3 or 4 congregations in the United States. The denomination sort of chose, we'll go and start something in this reservation, etc. So there'll be, in my hometown, there's a Methodist presence, but there's not other denominations. And so, or there might be a Presbyterian, or there might be a Lutheran presence in various, on various tribal lands. And so, because we're so small, we were given four, I think. It was a very good meeting. Our denomination is going through a huge change. We started out as an immigrant denomination of Dutch people, and then we've become a truly American denomination. So our general secretary, the head of our communion, was born in Nicaragua. The head of our global mission was born in Bangalore. The head of our seminary was born in Indonesia. And so we're becoming sort of the Reformed Church in the Americas more and more. Spanish is everything in our denomination is in at least two languages.
English and Spanish.
Yeah, and increasingly Portuguese, and we have Brazilian connections as well. So we're becoming a less Eurocentric denomination, even though we originated in Europe, right? From immigrants in two big waves, one in the colonial period and one in sort of the expansion period of Dutch people. But we haven't been called the Dutch Reformed Church since 1864. So.
Yes, I checked the website and I was quite surprised.
And now
this came up.
It's harder and harder to find a Van der Laan or a Van Dyke as a leader in the church. My own name, is a Scottish name, right? So it's become a very American, in that broader sense, denomination. And we are in the U.S. and Canada, and now beginning to move into South America, the Caribbean, Central America, and we're navigating that, what that looks like. And there's some, like any change, there's nervousness about that.
And which countries are kind of success stories for this church planting?
Which countries within our denomination?
Yes.
There's been quite a bit of work done in the Dominican Republic, where there are, churches that there's really a denomination that has grown up there. Chiapas, Mexico, among the Mayan tribes, 150 years ago, really, we started that work. And just completed our mission presence in the peninsula, in the Yucatan Peninsula, officially. And so, what we've historically done is started local denominations, not connected to the American denomination. But now the American denomination is becoming so intertwined. I mean, all of the Americas are becoming much more fluid between them. And so it's hard to say, when your general secretary was born in Nicaragua and has his office in Michigan, where is he from? Right? Those realities are really changing.
And how the social issues are affecting the church?
Oh, yeah, tremendously. I think that, our Eurocentric way of doing things, as an immigrant church, was to make statements. That's what we like to do, is draw up statements about things. And so we've spent a lot of time making statements about things. I think that trend has started to drop off among us, realizing that statements just almost sometimes draw lines in the sand that are not helpful, right? And so I think, really helping people to try to listen to one another and connect with one another who may have differing opinions about things is something that we're working on, but yeah, I think the United States is a particularly political culture, right? I mean, just the way that it was constituted was every person has their vote and their opinion and their idea, right? I mean, that was the ideal, right? And so we're sort of trained to argue with one another. And I think as a younger person, I'm 62 years old, and when I was in college, we would have these vigorous debates, and then we'd go out for pizza, right? We were friends, right? I think in the last 10 years, people have gotten much more vitriolic. They've taken themselves way more seriously in terms of their opinion. Everyone seems to believe that they are a broadcaster, right? I mean, when you have access to potentially millions of people, when you send a tweet, you suddenly your opinion seems to count more than it used to. I don't know if that makes sense. And so people get very, very agitated and very, very excited about their opinion. And then, of course, disinformation and all of the phenomena that are going on globally affect us. And so the U.S. it can be a difficult place right now.
Yes, basically, your region is still facing with economic issues because the Rust Belt area lost its car companies. They moved to Mexico, China.
And of course, that goes back, Michigan is where I'm from, of course. And Michigan is known for its steel production, iron ore. We dug the iron ore, and then we sent it to places like Pittsburgh and Cleveland, and they made it into steel, and then they sent it back to us, and we made it into cars. I mean, we had this whole system on these enormous lakes. And really, when relations were normalized with China in the 70s, they could just float steel right across to California. And so our car companies moved to the Pacific coast and left us very, very devastated in so many ways. The Rust Belt, that was my job for 10 years, was to plant churches in the Rust Belt, because many of our churches have disappeared. People have just left.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask.
Yeah.
But how did you manage to keep the communities?
Well, we didn't. In many cases, many of them just evaporated as their communities developed. In Dearborn, for example, in Detroit, right, it is the largest Arabic-speaking community outside of the Middle East. All of our documents in Michigan are in 3 languages: English, Spanish, and Arabic. And so you can imagine a church that started up as a Baptist church or Reformed church in a neighborhood in that area that's now surrounded completely by Muslims doesn't have much of a chance to reach out to its neighborhood, right? And so we've seen many of those churches close. And so we've tried to go back and reorient it. Plus, then huge economic disasters occurred. Detroit itself, some of it became open farmland. Some of it became just heaps of garbage. Some of it was renewed as a modern city, right? And so one of our projects was we bought a house in a neighborhood in Detroit where, probably 50% of the people live in a house that doesn't belong to them. They just break in and move into the house.
Because nobody
cares about it. And so we bought this house, and many of the houses don't have heat or electricity or anything. And so we turned on the electricity, and we had heat, and people would come in the winter, and we'd give them a meal. The pastors there would have, meetings every day, Bible studies, different kinds of training and how to fix your house up, different kinds of things. And so the church really became a resource for just the basics of life in places like that. And
So you were replacing the state, actually, giving aid to the people.
And the state is, the relationship between poverty and the state in the United States is very different than Europe. It's very limited in the United States.
Each state are different because
Each
California
state is different.
rich and giving a lot of aid to the
Yeah.
people, but Michigan is not
Michigan is not as much.
Yes.
It's sort of in the middle, right? And there are, it's beyond the scope of our interview to talk about those kinds of things, but there are people that really fall through the cracks in the system. They can't access the system. And so some of our work is to help people access the system.
Because right now in Hungary, that's what we can see, that the churches are getting the job.
Right.
This kind of
more and
giving
more
aid, taking care of the old people, doing the education, which is not so usual in a secular state.
Yeah. And, it's an interesting it's a frontier. It's something that I don't know that we know whether that will work or not, right? I can point to many places where it really works well, many places where, really the largest aid organization in the United States is Catholic Charities, right? And without them, the state could not operate their system. And much aid would go away without them. So it's an interesting idea to have the church be involved. I think it can work if the church has a social consciousness, right? But if a church is trying to get converts through its efforts, that is both bad religion and bad public assistance, right? So it has to be carefully thought through, I think.
Yeah, we had an interview with the bishop, Károly Fekete.
Yeah.
And we were asking him why is it worse to have more schools or more elder houses, and when we were telling that it's strange that the church is getting more money for each student than an average secular school, he said it's not exactly like that, and they don't accept all the schools when the government offering the schools for them.
Right.
So that's why I was asking you how this is working in the US, if the government of Hungary is taking examples or the Protestant church is checking examples, because it's different, but there are some similarities.
I think that there are remarkable examples of really great things where the government and the church are cooperating. And then there are also examples where there's just not enough of the church or not enough of the state, right? And so it's a mixture. It is. It's an interesting subject to think through. Certainly, the church does well when it has the public good in mind. I always try to remind people who are they said, well, we're trying to create a community. I said, yes, but not for ourselves. This is a public witness to the love of God and the mercy of Jesus Christ, right? And so we do have a public responsibility, right? Oh,
No, I'm just checking if.
so
And what do you think about the church plans in the eastern part of Europe, like in the Orthodox areas? Some years ago, one young priest told me that was the biggest mistake, that the Hungarian priest didn't deliver the message of God to the Romanians, for example. So the Protestantism stopped at the Carpathian Mountains.
Yeah. Well, we have one project that we work with in Romania, and it's really emerged out of a community development project for young people. And so many of the people that were served by this youth ministry really became believers in Jesus Christ, and they tried to find a place in the church. And because of their social and economic condition, their language, other things, they didn't find a lot of welcome in the various churches: Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, and so this youth minister started a church there, and we helped him do it. And they've got a good relationship with all of the churches around, I think. But I think when there's a need that is not being met by other churches, I think it makes sense to start something completely new and completely different. Because we're not going to run out of the need, right? If we're at less than 4 churches per 10,000 people, I mean, those churches have to get really big before there's not a need for new churches. Right? So that's very pragmatic. I don't know that I would make the best ecumenical officer, But we try to work with the ecumenical offices and try to be as sensitive as possible, right, when we start a new church. But we don't say, well, we're going to start a church there, right? We just kind of come alongside churches that need our help, who are sort of organically beginning, if that makes sense.
And can you give an example for the readers how this help can be meant? So I just read your interview with on the website of the Egyetemi Gyülekezet.
Yeah.
And there was that what you do here can be used in the US, or good examples in the US can be used here.
Yeah.
So
I think
can you give some examples?
There's an exchange of ideas. Sometimes there's, I think a lot of it is when you're starting something new, there's not a lot of people that know what you're going through, right? Yes, you have a minister of a congregation, but if all the other congregations are 100 years old, their experience is quite different than starting from the beginning. And so that's one of the things that I think we can provide, and that has really worked, is people that have done this in the United States, identifying with people that are doing it here, and comparing notes. Loneliness is feeling like you're the only one who has these particular sets of issues and problems, right, is one of the hardest things to overcome when you're working on a new project. And so I think that's one of the main things that we help to provide, is that sense of you're okay. Other people have done this. Here they are. You're seen. You're connected. You're encouraged. I think the emotional support is some of the most important stuff. I had a European fellow say that to me. He says, you could provide all kinds of material support to us, and that's great, but just having the emotional support to go through the newness of this with people that have been through it, right? And I think that's where you don't always get that in a local community. Maybe you're the only new church in town for a long, long time, right? And so I think that's a huge part of what we provide, is that sort of fellowship of connection, of shared experiences. Because it's a very difficult thing, when you're starting a new congregation, you have very few people. There's always this sense, I think every church planter has a nightmare that they wake up and everyone has decided to leave their church that day, right? And no one is coming. And sometimes it feels like it's very vulnerable, right? So I think that's a lot of it. A lot of it is that common experience, common know-how, right? And that's one of the things I do. I mean, I've worked with hundreds of new churches over the last 30 years of my career, right? And so it's sometimes somebody just needs to hear, oh, that's normal. People go through that. You're going to be okay. Yeah.
And what kind of future do you predict for the Protestant church?
Oh, well, I think the Protestant church, I think Protestantism, like anything, will change. It has changed, right? Our great hope is in one church, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, revealing itself finally in the kingdom of God, coming to the whole world, right? So our future arcs toward hope, right? As our theology is a theology of resurrection and of hope. So I'm very hopeful for the future. I think we're gonna face some very difficult times, like we are. I think we're in. We are facing very difficult times. I think Protestantism itself has to figure out what its denominations exist for, right? It used to be, you had the Pope, and then the Metropolitan, right? And then the Protestants had their prince, right? Or their protector, right? Well, we're no longer in the Middle Ages, right? We're in societies that are themselves struggling with what authority means, right? What does a church look like in a democracy, right? What does it look like in a free society? I think that's going to require a lot of thinking, a lot of practical theology, a lot of struggle for our churches to maintain their focus on Jesus, right, and his core message in the midst, and really be a servant to these societies, and to be a sign of love to people from all walks of life. I think that's going to be a huge challenge. It's not easy, right?
And what kind of critics have you heard about the Protestant church during your career?
Oh, yeah. Where do you want to start? How long do you have, right?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, and of course, my side, in the more conservative, evangelical, I suppose, not evangelical in the sense of the Lutheran Church, but evangelical in the sense of, conservative Protestantism in the United States. A lot of very poignant criticisms have been aimed at us, right? That we're concerned with only the other world, right? Only concerned with saving souls and going to heaven, those kinds of things. I don't think that's fair or true, but I understand where the criticism comes from, and I think we have to do everything that we can to show that we're living out our faith in real life, in real time, our families, in our society, in our workplaces, not as some sort of bully, right? You must do it our way, but as some sort of but as a servant, right? So I think that's gonna continue to be a problem, right, for us, is that charge of otherworldliness, right? I think one of the things that we are guilty of, and that we've been charged with, especially in America, is anti-intellectualism. That we're not really integrating science and religion. We're not thinking about the realities of life in the way that other people are, and so I think that means more Christians, becoming better and better scientists and physicians and engineers and politicians, and not in order to enforce some sort of religious order, but in order to be good stewards of our resources and who we are, the humanity that we represent, right? We're the most success. The church, Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox, Pentecostal. I would say you have to put the fourth branch is Pentecostal. We're the most successful organization in human history, right? There's never been a group of people this large, right? So we have some stewardship. We have some responsibility to the world. I think we have to be more concerned about the climate. We have to be more concerned about stewarding the planet. We have to be more concerned about justice and the alleviation of poverty and war and some of these kind of things. We're not the United Nations, though. I mean, we're a church. And so we have to keep at our core mission, right? So, yeah, some of the criticisms have been just. Yeah. Yeah, so, I think in my life I've tried to be a reformer as well as a recruiter, right, to the faith, because I think we're under constant scrutiny by the world, and we need to make adjustments to our true north. To the person of Jesus Christ. So, I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what did you experience? Why people left the Reformed Church? Not just here.
Yeah, in the U.S.
Or why did they join?
Yeah. Oh, that's a really good question. I think I've seen people leave the Reformed Church because they felt that it was too rigid. Or too concerned with certain theological questions, right? And they were looking for something more free-floating or free-form. But then I've also seen people, as they've matured, they may have come to know Christ in a free church or in some other kind of church, and they're realizing, there's a lot. When we read the Bible, there's a lot that's hard to understand. There's a lot that needs to be thought through. And I think they've seen us do that in some amazing ways, right? I think the Reformed faith has tried to, see the Bible as a whole and see how it creates a coherent theology, and I think people are looking for that. I think we're particularly seeing that in South America, where there were many Pentecostal churches that grew up, and many people left Catholicism, many people left other, even pagan, lifestyles or religions. And now, as they're maturing, they're saying, we need something more comprehensive, something that actually wrestles with some of these theological issues. And so they're coming to us.
And where the people are coming from and where the people are going to? What do you see?
Yeah, I think, it's interesting. On a global scale, more people have become Christians in the last 100 years than ever were Christians before, right? There is a huge expansion of Christianity, even though there's a decline in the West, right? And so one of the things that we have to see is that as Western Christians, we need to really embrace the Southern global Christian. We need to learn from that. We need these kinds of west to west exchanges, but we also need these south to north exchanges, right? There are many things that we can learn from the vitality of Africa, South America, Southeast Asia, right? So I think people are coming to Christ, from learning from their parents, but they're also converting to Christ as they begin to see some of the hollowness of complete secularism. The Enlightenment, they're finding out, isn't as enlightened as they thought it was, right? So they're looking for the light of the world, right? And so we're seeing that, people hoping for meaning and for a way to center their life. I think when people are leaving, often they're going because there have been hurts or abuse or difficulties. And often they're just going into this sort of, it's very acceptable not to be a religious person. So it's very easy to go from being irreligious to religious to irreligious again. And that's something we've never seen in human history. And so how do you track that? That's going to be an interesting dilemma for the 21st century and 22nd century church, is how do you reclaim the people that were irreligious, became religious, and are now irreligious again, right? Yeah. So the level of complexity is much higher.
And did you experience that which seems to be like true, the Protestants and of course the Reformed Church members are much so more people out of these religious groups are depressed than the Catholics, because they can confess their sins, not like the Protestants who are carrying their problems day to day.
Interesting. I've never thought of it that way. I haven't seen that research, but it could be true. Yeah. I think mental health is becoming, is the 21st century's, one of the 21st century's biggest problems, because of urbanization, industrialization, the information age. It's actually changed the chemistry of our brains. In a way that I don't think we've seen in human history. And so I think mental health and faith, I think, can work together. I'm seeing, we need to have a consistent theology of mental health that says, prayer is good, confession of faith is good, but also you might need some therapy, you need some attention to your needs mentally and psychologically. So I think we're going to see faith play a big part in that. In America, I've seen Protestantism more open to mental health issues than I saw in Catholicism, I think. But again, there are many pockets of, especially very conservative Christianity, that say, no, you should not receive mental health care. You should pray, and you should confess your sins, and that's enough. And, Philippians chapter 4, they'll quote, you'll be at peace if you don't worry about a thing, right? and I think that's a too simplistic approach to the issues. I think we have to have a holistic view of mental health and depression, especially in this altered state that we live in. You know, this is a new world for us mentally. It's a new frontier.
Is there anything else which you would like to add?
Well, you've asked the question about everything, it seems. I was thinking that I would just be talking about the mechanics of my work, but you've taken this into a much broader realm. It's very stimulating. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.